Thank you for joining me for a special edition of This Is the Way podcast. November 12th marks the anniversary of Disney+. It debuted 5 years ago, which means The Mandalorian debuted 5 years ago, and also This Is the Way podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Mandalorian podcast, where we're going to be talking a lot about the new Disney Plus original TV series, The Mandalorian, that debuts today, November 12th, 2019, along with the Disney Plus streaming service. My name is Steve Lascalzo. I love Star Wars. I love lots of other things, too, but I love Star Wars. That's when I decided to air the first podcast in this series. It was called something different at the time, I know, but it was really an introduction to what I had hoped this podcast would be covering with the new season of Star Wars streaming. It was a first. This was a big deal to me because it looked and felt like the flavor of Star Wars that I liked best. The Return of the Jedi, I know it was set a few years later, but it still had that feel to me in the footage that I had seen, and I was very excited. The idea of a bounty hunter. I mean, we didn't even know at that point, remember, when I put the podcast on, it was before the shows were airing. I set it to debut before I saw an episode. I recorded it the day before, or maybe even 2 days before. It was based on what I had hoped I would see. And then we didn't have our first episode recap until the weekend. And I had been talking to my friends and trying to get some of my friends together to record a podcast and start one. Did you guys feel like this added to or took away or didn't change at all how you feel about the things you love? Because my favorite movies are Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, and New Hope. I mean, I love that original trilogy. I love the other stuff too. And they were available that Sunday, I think, or Saturday or Sunday. And so the first episode where we met Grogu, who we just knew as the child at the time, I mean, that hadn't aired yet. So I debuted a podcast based on hope, based on what I hoped I would be seeing. Now, 5 years later, we've had several series: The Book of Boba Fett, The Acolyte, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, which is just fantastic. And I just saw today that Disney put out a new video on what's coming on Disney Plus and Hulu in 2025. And the new footage of Andor Season 2 and The Skeleton Crew, which will debut in 2024 in less than a month now. And that looks exciting. I couldn't be more excited. I haven't been this excited about Star Wars streaming in a long, long time. It was just so awesome. Grogu called the Jedi, called for help. He's touching the screen, right? He called and the Jedi answered. Jaren tells him, open the door. Shan thinks he's crazy. The Jedi enters. Lightsaber is drawn and on. Still he's hooded. Green glow is shining off the Beskar of the Mandalorian. There's guns pointed at this figure. He turns the saber off. He clips it to his belt. He drops back the cloak hood. And yes, it was a little uncanny valley, but it is Luke freaking Skywalker. And I lost it. I lost it at that moment. I was like, I can't believe they did it. This episode is a little different. I don't have any notes. It's a lot more free-flowing, I suppose you'd say. But I just wanted to get something out to say thank you to the listeners who have been with me since the beginning. I had more because of the content that was being put out. And I've learned as a podcaster that makes a huge difference. The content that you have to cover definitely helps or hurts your podcast, even more than the quality of it. I know that some people have enjoyed having more people on the podcast because, I don't know, just hearing me speak all the time isn't very fun, I suppose. But the content matters a lot too. If it's a good show like Andor, the numbers are better. It's not like people know that the
show is going to be better. I think it's just that when the show is better, people want to hear more or discuss more. They don't want to let the show go as much as when the show isn't very good. So the positivity and negativity of the podcast host does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as the quality of the show. It just doesn't. I don't want to get into it here because I feel like I would ramble on about how bad some shows are compared to others. All I really want to do is just talk about how excited I am again, finally, for Star Wars streaming. And Disney Plus has got a few great shows. The Skeleton Crew is something I'm looking forward to. I plan on covering that with a special guest host. I don't know if she will join me, but I'm really excited about that show. I think there's a lot of potential for me to enjoy that show because I did like the Goonies, and I know people say Goonies in space, Goonies in Star Wars. I'm there for that. What I've seen so far, it could be bad, it could be terrible. The kid actors could be terrible, the story could be awful, but I've just got this hope that what I'm seeing, that I'm just going to enjoy it for a fun watch. And there's so few of those left for me. The Andor season 2, I mean, I give Tony Gilroy a wide berth. Like he can do, it's not like he can't do any wrong, but he can do almost anything, I think. And I think just there is something to that I am more positive about this than I have been about some of the other shows. Okay? I haven't heard anything bad, and I saw a full season of 12 episodes of Andor that didn't disappoint me. I don't think there was an episode that really let me down. Not so with some of the other shows. I had to really put on my positivity cap for one of the shows that was out recently. And there was just one moment at the end of one of the episodes that I felt like, okay, all right, if they keep going this way, then I will be pleased. And that was the one and only part of the entire episode and the entire series that I felt was exciting as a Star Wars fan. And they didn't develop it, they didn't go anywhere with it, and they didn't have plans to go anywhere with it. So 5 years of podcasts. What have we done? Well, we started news update podcasts. That was something interesting. We've had episodes about collectibles. We've had special episodes with my dad, with my daughters. Maybe my wife will join me one of these days. I know I have friends that have said, hey, if you want to interview me. I've had sponsors. I've had no sponsors for a while now. I was getting paid to do this podcast a little bit, and now the ad revenue, Spotify has changed things the way you get ad revenue now for your podcast. So there's been a lot of ups and downs, and I don't do this to get paid. That would be nice, but I don't do this to get paid. I do it because that's how much I love Star Wars, and I wasn't getting Star Wars specific content, and I haven't found another podcast out there. I used to listen a lot to the Jedi Council by Collider. I think it was something else at first. It was maybe AMC or something was doing it first, but I used to listen to a lot of Jedi Council or watch Jedi Council on YouTube. And that was really the only other source that I got my Star Wars news from. And I wasn't seeing a lot of that. I like the guys from Bald Move. I think they do a great job, but I don't think they're big Star Wars fans. I think they're more into the Star Trek stuff, and their Star Wars coverage, I think, has been lacking. I haven't really enjoyed any of the podcasts by the websites like StarWarsNews.net. I don't think the Resistance broadcast is that great. They probably would say the same thing about mine. It's just my personal preference, so I wasn't seeing what I wanted out there, and so I figured, hey, let me give this a shot. And if you're listening, well, then maybe perhaps you think I'm doing a good job, but it's also possible that this is the first episode you ever have listened to, and you think, Man, I cannot stand listening to that guy. Either way, that's fine, because I'm not doing it really for anybody else. I'm doing it because I just love to talk about it, and I do hope that I find people who are like me and maybe want to go on this journey. And by journey, I mean just podcasting and just talking about stuff and putting it out there for other people to hear. I've learned a lot. I mean, you listen to the first few episodes of our podcast, and there were audio things. I mean, I was learning a new audio software. I use Audacity, and it's a free, it's an open source audio recorder, and I have gotten a lot better with it. But those first few episodes, I was using a unidirectional mic. I only thought I was going to need one mic for two people, but then I got to the first recap episode podcast, and oh yeah, my buddy wanted to come along. So we had three people crowding around a unidirectional mic. It was very difficult to get good audio, and I looked into trying to get two mic sources in the same, and it just would have been too big of an investment. And at that point, I wasn't even sure I was going to continue on with this podcast. Well, now 5 years later, I've got a setup that works for me, and I figured out there's been other applications and programs like Discord now lets you record. There are programs that you can use inside Discord that will let you separate the audio so you can have a dedicated track, and then that you can upload that directly into Audacity, and it has 3 separate tracks, which makes audio editing so much simpler. And that may be too technical for you, but those are things that I've had to learn. And I'm a professional broadcaster. I worked in the television and radio business since 1997. I was in radio, and then 1998, 99, I was in TV. And then until 2008, I was doing that professionally. So I still had a lot to learn when you're doing podcast. I wish I had started podcasting way back when it first came out. That would have been great. I know that podcasts, especially about Star Wars, have been around for a long time, but I just think I missed the boat on that. I think I was too involved I was doing sports broadcasting, so I was too involved in doing other stuff. And I always had this love for Star Wars, but man, I wish I would have gotten in on the ground floor with like the prequels and done broadcasts about that. Although, if you think about it, it makes sense that once Disney started streaming with Disney Plus, that's when more podcasts would come out. There's more content than there ever has been before. Some of it good, some of it not so good. But it definitely feels good that I made that decision to start the podcast on an easy-to-remember date. Disney Plus is 5 years old, and so is This Is The Way podcast. We are at episode 161, which means if things go according to plan, November's news update will be 162, which is a full baseball season. Thanks for joining me today for this special edition of This Is The Way podcast. I'm your host, Steve Lascalzo, and may the Force be with you always.